May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The air across America buzzed with jubilation, church bells clanging, crowds spilling into city streets, strangers hugging in tearful relief as news of Germany's surrender spread like wildfire. Factories whistled, radios blared triumphant anthems, and families raised glasses to the end of a brutal war. But in the quiet confines of a modest prisoner of war camp just outside Fort Deans, Massachusetts, the atmosphere was anything but celebratory. Here, a group of German women, once fierce auxiliaries of the Third Reich, stood in hushed formation, their faces etched with a complex mix of emotions. When their American captors announced, "You can go home now," the response was not cheers or hurried packing. Instead, many of these women refused to leave. Why would prisoners of war, after months of captivity, turn their backs on freedom and choose to remain in the land of their former enemies? Their story is one of unexpected kindness, shattering revelations, and the profound redefinition of what home truly means. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable tale, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from today, and what surprises you most about history's hidden chapters? It all began 6 months earlier, in the crisp chill of November 1944. A weathered military truck rumbled up the dirt road to the barbed wire fences of Fort Deans, a small, makeshift camp far removed from the sprawling male POW facilities dotting the American landscape. Out stepped 60 German women, members of the Frauenhelferinnen Corps, the Women's Auxiliary Corps, captured amid the chaotic retreats in France and Belgium as Allied forces pushed toward the heart of the Reich. These were not battle-hardened soldiers, but young women, aged 18 to 35, who had served in support roles. Radio operators tapping out coded messages, nurses tending to the wounded, clerks organizing the machinery of war. Their gray uniforms, now tattered from travel and defeat, still clung to remnants of pride, faded eagle patches and insignia that once symbolized unyielding loyalty. Leading the group was 22-year-old Ingrid Müller, a telegraph operator from the bustling port city of Berlin. With her sharp features and determined gaze, she clutched a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with hurried sketches and private musings from her days on the front lines. Beside her walked Clara Schmidt, a 20-year-old nurse from Munich, her blonde hair tied back severely, her hands still bearing the faint scars of battlefield aid. The women moved in disciplined silence, their boots crunching on the gravel, eyes darting to the American guards who watched with a mix of curiosity and caution. Captain Elizabeth Harper, a seasoned 35-year-old officer from Chicago, and one of the few women in command roles, oversaw their arrival. With her crisp uniform and no-nonsense demeanor, she had been handpicked for this unusual assignment. As the women filed into the compound, a cluster of wooden barracks surrounded by watchtowers and fences, she noted their rigid military bearing. They stood taller, straighter than many of her own troops, whispering in low German tones during the initial processing. The camp itself was modest, a central mess hall, a small library stocked with donated books, a medical hut, and communal sleeping quarters. Unlike the larger camps holding thousands of male POWs, Fort Deans was intimate, almost domestic, housing only these 60 women in a war that had largely overlooked their existence. The early days were marked by a palpable tension, thick as the New England fog rolling in from the nearby coast. The German women kept to themselves, adhering strictly to routines: morning roll calls at dawn, meals of simple American fare like oatmeal and canned stew, afternoon work details mending fences or tending a small vegetable garden. Conversations were sparse, limited to hushed exchanges in their native tongue. Ingrid, ever the observer, jotted in her notebook, "These Americans watch us like hawks, but there's no cruelty in their eyes, only wariness. What do they see when they look at us? Monsters or misguided girls?" Captain Harper, drawing from her own experiences growing up in a multicultural neighborhood, encouraged her staff to maintain professionalism without hostility. "They're prisoners, not animals," she reminded her guards during briefings. "Treat them with the dignity we'd expect for our own." Yet, The divide seemed insurmountable. Propaganda on both sides had painted the other as irredeemable foes. As autumn faded into the harsh bite of winter, subtle shifts began to erode the barriers. It started with everyday acts of humanity that no training manual could predict. Private Thomas Reed, a lanky 19-year-old farm boy from rural Ohio, was on guard duty one blustery evening when he spotted Clara Schmidt during roll call, her thin frame shivering uncontrollably in the cutting wind. Defying strict protocols that forbade fraternization, he quietly fetched an extra wool scarf from the supply room and slipped it to her under the guise of routine inspection. Clara, whose blue eyes widened in surprise, hesitated before wrapping it around her neck. "Danke," she murmured, the word soft but sincere. For the first time since her capture, a flicker of warmth crossed her face, melting the icy guard she had maintained. Word of Reed's gesture rippled through the camp, inspiring others. Sergeant Maria Lopez, a spirited first-generation Mexican-American from Texas, whose own family had faced prejudice, recognized the isolation in the women's eyes. She began informal English lessons in the mess hall after meals, using chalk on a makeshift board to teach basic phrases like hello, thank you, and how are you. Ingrid, with her quick mind and prior schoolroom exposure to English, eagerly participated, scribbling notes furiously in her notebook. "These lessons are more than words," she confided to Clara one night. "They're windows into their world. Sergeant Lopez laughs like my sister used to, freely, without fear." Another prisoner, 25-year-old Greta Hahn, a former clerk from Dresden, found solace in the camp's garden. Assigned to weeding duties, she crossed paths with Corporal James Wilkins, a black soldier from Harlem who had joined the army to prove his patriotism despite segregation back home. Noticing Greta's efficient methods, he shared tips from his grandmother's urban plot, handing her seeds for hardy vegetables. Their conversations, halting at first, touched on shared loves, music, family recipes, bridging oceans of difference. Greta, who had been taught to view non-Aryans as inferior, began to question the lies fed to her by the regime. By mid-December, the camp's atmosphere had warmed, if only slightly. Snow blanketed the grounds, turning Fort Deans into a serene, almost picturesque enclave. Captain Harper, aware of the women's growing homesickness as the holidays approached, debated how to handle Christmas. Ultimately, she approved a modest celebration, allowing the prisoners to craft decorations from scraps, paper chains, pine cone ornaments, even a small tree in the mess hall. The women threw themselves into the task, their fingers deft from years of auxiliary training. On Christmas Eve, the breakthrough came. Ingrid, emerging as an unofficial leader among the women, approached Captain Harper with a bold request. Her English, improved through Lopez's lessons, carried a tentative lilt. "Captain, may we sing for you? Our German carols, and perhaps an American song we've been practicing in secret." Harper, after a moment's hesitation, nodded. That night, under the soft glow of lantern light, the 60 women gathered, their voices rising in harmonious precision with Stille Nacht, the German version of Silent Night. The melody, haunting and pure, filled the hall, drawing even the off-duty guards to listen. Then, with imperfect but earnest pronunciation, they transitioned to Jingle Bells, their accents adding a charming twist to the upbeat tune. Private Reed, leaning against the wall, later penned a letter home. "Ma, you'd never believe it. Those German gals singing our songs. It made me forget the war for a spell. They looked so young, like the girls back in church choir, far from home and scared just like us." Tears glistened in many eyes that evening, American and German alike. Gifts were exchanged unofficially, handmade cards, a bar of chocolate from rations, and for the first time, laughter echoed through the barracks. The new year brought harsher realities. By February 1945, as Allied forces advanced into Germany, disturbing reports filtered into the camp via newspapers and radio broadcasts. Captain Harper allowed supervised access to these sources as part of a subtle re-education effort, hoping to foster reflection. Ingrid and Clara huddled in the library one stormy afternoon, poring over grainy photos in the Boston Globe, skeletal figures in striped uniforms, mass graves at Bergen-Belsen, the systematic horrors of Dachau and Auschwitz. Ingrid's hands trembled as she turned the pages. This can't be our Germany," she whispered, her voice breaking. Clara, usually stoic, buried her face in her hands. "Did we aid this madness? Our messages, our care for soldiers? Were we part of the machine?" The revelation sparked nights of soul-searching among the women. Greta confided in her bunkmates about doubts she'd harbored even before capture, while others defended their ignorance, insisting they had served only to protect their homeland. Ingrid's notebook filled with anguished entries. "We were told the Jews were enemies, the camp's labor facilities. Lies upon lies. How do we face a country built on such darkness? And what of our families? Do they know? Or are they gone?" Spring arrived with blooming dogwoods and news of Germany's imminent collapse. The camp's dynamics had transformed. Meals featured mixed conversations in Pidgin English-German. Guards shared stories of their hometowns, and the women volunteered for extra duties, from sewing uniforms to assisting in the medical hut. Ingrid had become a vital translator, mediating minor disputes and even helping plan camp activities. Clara, under Dr. Samuel Cohen's guidance, a Jewish-American physician who had lost relatives in Europe, honed her nursing skills, her empathy shining through despite the irony of her past uniform. But the true test came on May 15, 1945. Captain Harper assembled the women in the mess hall, her voice steady as she read from official orders. "The war in Europe is over. Repatriation procedures will begin shortly. You'll be sent home to Germany." A murmur rippled through the group. Then Ingrid rose, her posture resolute, hands clasped to hide their shake. "Captain Harper, please. Some of us do not wish to return. Not yet." 10 others stood beside her, including Clara and Greta. Their voices overlapped in a chorus of pleas. A Germany in rubble, families vanished in bombings, a society poisoned by the regime's crimes. But more than fear, they spoke of the unexpected haven they'd found. Kindness that contradicted propaganda, opportunities to learn and grow, a sense of community absent in their war-torn lives. The guards were dumbfounded, prisoners begging to remain in captivity. It defied logic. Captain Harper, masking her own surprise, promised to relay the request. In the days that followed, the camp buzzed with debate. Local newspapers caught wind, running headlines like, "Nazi women prefer American prison to German freedom." Church groups visited, offering support while some veterans protested. Inside, the women grappled internally. Greta wavered, torn between staying and returning to search for her missing brother, ultimately deciding to go home as an ambassador of change. Captain Harper's telegram to Washington detailed the situation, emphasizing the women's transformation. The response, after tense waiting, was pragmatic. Those wishing to stay could be reclassified as displaced persons, but they must secure sponsors, employment, and housing. No longer wards of the military, they'd navigate civilian life in a nation still healing from war. Of the 11 who initially stood, 7 committed to staying, including Ingrid and Clara. The Peterson family, kind-hearted farmers from a nearby town who had bonded with Ingrid through church outreach, offered her sponsorship. They provided a spare room on their sprawling farm, where Ingrid tutored their children in languages and helped with chores, her notebook now chronicling recipes and American idioms. Clara, praised by Dr. Cohen for her natural healing touch, moved to a Worcester hospital for formal nursing training, her days filled with patient care that felt like redemption. The remaining 53 women, including Greta, prepared for repatriation. On June 10, 1945, Fort Deans hosted a poignant farewell. The departing group stood in loose formation, no longer rigid soldiers but women changed by experience. Hugs replaced salutes, letters and mementos were exchanged. A pressed flower, a handmade quilt square. Captain Harper addressed them. "You arrived as enemies, but you depart as bridges between worlds. Carry the lessons of dignity and forgiveness back with you, and help rebuild what was broken." Ingrid, speaking for those staying, replied, We came blinded by lies, but you opened our eyes to truth. America isn't just a place, it's a possibility we never imagined. In the years that followed, the women who stayed forged new paths in their adopted homeland. Ingrid, marrying a local teacher in 1948, became a translator for the Red Cross, aiding waves of European refugees with her unique bilingual empathy. Her notebook, preserved as a family heirloom, accompanied her to a 1975 speech at a Boston Peace Conference. Home isn't defined by borders or blood, it's where you choose to plant roots of hope and humanity. Clara never married, instead rising to head nurse at her hospital, where she mentored young aides and volunteered at veteran centers, viewing her work as quiet atonement. Healing others heals the past, she often said. Those who returned to Germany faced devastation, bombed cities, rationed food, divided families, but armed with stories of American compassion, they became quiet advocates for reconciliation. Greta located her brother in a displaced persons camp, and together founded a German-American Friendship Society, hosting exchange programs that echoed the camp's lessons. The Fort Dean story, once a fleeting headline in the New York Times as "German prisoners choose America over ruins," evolved into a symbol of post-war redemption. It influenced U.S. policies on refugees, demonstrating that extending dignity to former foes could foster lasting alliances. Decades later, descendants of these women, both in America and Germany, share tales of that pivotal choice, reminding us that even in war's darkest aftermath, individuals can rewrite their destinies, turning enmity into enduring bonds. What does home mean to you in light of this story? Share your reflections in the comments, and let's honor these unsung chapters of history together.